we've got geopolitical tensions, we've got different things happening on different parts of the world.
Yes.
Energy independence, what does this mean for Hawaii?
What we want to do is get rid of energy dependence. That's what we have to start looking at, and that we can do something about. And there are practical steps that can be taken. I was referring before we got started to a very interesting, called a special sustainability issue. Pacific Edge, you're familiar with it because you've got an article
Right.
in here. And one of the things that I commented to you in this Pacific Edge magazine from April and June of last year was an article on the kids. And to them it's not strange at all. The idea of green energy, the idea of alternative energy, the idea of renewable energy, the difference between alternative and renewable energy, those things are not strange concepts to the kids at all.
That's amazing.
So we, I think, have this opportunity now to take what is a rising consciousness, not just in Hawaii but in the world, everything from climate change to global warming to acknowledged dependency on fossil-based fuels, and the increasing competition for it, raising the prices, and
Right.
how that leaves Hawaii even more vulnerable than it was before. Take advantage of all of that and start moving towards less dependency and more independence in terms of resources and utilization of existing local resources.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people are far more ready to act on that and to invest in it, not just in terms of money, but invest in it programmatically and even emotionally.
Are we on track? The mandate is 70% clean energy by 2030. We've got, about a decade or so. How's it looking?
Well, that's another thing that bothers me, like the word independence. So 70% by 2030. How are we going to get there? It's like saying it's 1 minute to go in the Super Bowl and we're on the 10-yard line, right? How are we going to do it? It, in a certain sense, demoralizes people to say that. I've never been necessarily in favor of setting these numerical goals and timelines as such. I'd much rather say, what do we have available to us? And how can we explore and exploit those resources that are available to us? What will it take to accomplish that? Once that's determined, then get moving. Some will go faster than others. Do we have to redo the Public Utilities Commission? Do we have to see about, do we have to reconceive of how we transmit energy? Do we see this as a statewide, that is to say islands-wide in the plural, or is this island by island, everybody on their own, and good luck? Those are the kinds of things that I think will determine whether we get to 60%, 70%, 80%, whether it's 2020 or 2030. That's less important than having an integrated plan and a plan and a game plan and a timeline that everybody agrees to, that they can see themselves participating in and accomplishing.
Then what about the playing field for developers, for investors, for the utility, for people that need to be involved to make this happen?
That's why you have to have a partnership. For example, we have to determine probably that we can't go island by island in terms of how we charge for electricity, how we charge for power, how we charge for energy. We're probably going to have an integrated plan where we're all going to help one another. So if we take this aloha spirit towards one another, if we regard ourselves as all in this together, I've used the analogy of in order for the canoe to get to the shore, everybody has to paddle together. If the partnerships are in geothermal, where the state uses its bonding authority, works with the private developers, if we can benefit the Hawaiian community in the process, and if it should be on ceded lands, for example, with geothermal, then the geothermal has to the degree it can be developed, needs to be shared. If there's a surplus from the Big Island, how do we get that distributed then elsewhere?
I see.
The majority of the population's on Oahu, but probably the majority of the alternative and renewable energy resources are elsewhere. So let's work together. We always did that before.
Okay, and in terms of what the state can do, the state has to coordinate and it has to be a part of the whole. Do you see anything that the state can do differently, or perhaps that it's not doing now?
Probably the latter part is right, what it's not doing now, as opposed to doing differently. Because in some respects, what we need to do has been so well known for so long that it's been a little self-defeating, because the outlines of where we need to go and how we need to get there, biofuels, solar, wind power, these are well known to everybody. Again, referring to the article in articles in your these young people here that I see, the path of the entrepreneur, some of the young folks that are pictured in strategies for change makers, that kind of thing. These young kids, it's not so much that we need to do anything differently. What we need to do is have enough confidence in ourselves to know that the path that's clearly in front of us has to be taken, and that means, in some respects, you gotta be ready to jump. It's like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. New world we're going into. Can we really make this solar work? Can we really change the utility company from being one of a combination of not so much manufacture, but one that is based on how much electricity it can sell, how much energy it can sell, to being a distribution. How much does it distribute, and how does it distribute it? I mean, we're in a situation now where somebody says, "God, we're losing money. Why?" Well, more people are using solar than ever before.
I saw that article.
It's supposed to be saving us money. Well, it is. They're not paying for it anymore, but they're contributing to the grid that's there. So what happened is we're in the midst of change now. It's not so much different than it is that the change is actually taking place, and we have to deal with the consequences of that change. It's like moving from horses to the internal combustion engine.
Would you consider it a moving target?
It's moving in this sense that there's not a set line to be advanced. Some things will move forward faster than others. Some things will work better than others. We had a lot of hope for ethanol at one point, but that has its limitations and even some of its drawbacks right now. We've never been able to effectively do that here in Hawaii in terms of manufacture. So we may have to reconfigure and reconsider what we want to do with ethanol, whether that may have had its purpose at the time, but it may not be the best alternative for us to pursue right now. And we want to avoid the competition in the sense that is biofuels better than geothermal. We don't want to be in a situation where geothermal is fighting with biofuels, and then we kind of leave solar and on the sidelines, or wind over here on the periphery. It's not a question of that. It's a question of how do we use such advantages as may exist for one or the other, or in combination, in a manner that advances energy, less energy dependence from the outside as it's possible to achieve. I want to move forward on every basis possible, to the degree and extent that it can be, and not see it as one trying to achieve something over the other.
Good, good. Well, we appreciate your comments today. Is there anything you'd like to say or add?
I think we have to have confidence in one another and in where we're going. We do have choices in that sense. I guess I'm circling back to my initial comments that in some senses we've been demoralized a bit. We tend to think of ourselves as victims. We tend to think of ourselves as being in a passive position. We need to go on offense. And we need to go on offense with the confidence that we know where we're going, we know where we want to get to, and we have a pretty fair idea of how we can get there. The question is, do we have the will? Do we have the determination? Do we have the perseverance, the sense of perseverance? And above all, the confidence that I mentioned, that we can make this. And the only way we can do that is if we work together. If we have a unity of purpose. Again, this is so Hawaiian. This is so the values of Hawaii, which are subsumed by every group that's come here, including the original Polynesians, after all. That these islands are, in fact, our opportunity to live in paradise. And if you live in paradise, you have an obligation, it seems to me, to be good stewards of that paradise. It's not something that's given for nothing. It's something that you have to earn in order to keep. And you have to, in a sense, I guess the idea of konahiki, that you have a responsibility of management, if you will, and that you're going to be called to account. And so Paradise is calling us to account now. we have now the opportunity to see whether or not we're worthy of living in paradise.
We spoke with the governor earlier about the overall view of renewable energy. And now we're with Mark Glick, who's the administrator of the State Energy Office. And he's going to provide a few more details and a few more specifics about what's happening with renewable energy over the next decade and longer. So, Mark, nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's good to see you, Jake.
So tell us, what's going to happen with the State Energy Office? You've taken over. Are you expecting any changes?
You know, since October, I stepped in, and frankly, there's three priorities that I really wanted to tackle. One was getting the office reorganized and maybe a little bit more nimble towards the economic analysis side, you know, to be able to actually provide really good hard economics, but keyly target this whole notion of fulfilling our Recovery Act grants. You know, we have two major grants that total about $36 million, and we want to make sure those were fully completed and expended.
And these grants are from where?
They're from the U.S. Department of Energy, and again, part of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and they allowed us to do a whole host of projects. A second big area of focus under the new energy office is really getting the this notion of interconnectivity, of moving towards an interconnected grid system throughout.
Can you explain that a little bit more? Is this connecting the islands?
Yeah, it's connecting the islands with electric power to help stabilize energy costs throughout the islands, and also to create a long-term stable environment for cost. We have such a diverse portfolio of renewable energy options. This really gives us the ability to incorporate as many of those as we can throughout the islands. As you know, the Big Island has enormous geothermal reservoirs, and also in Maui. We have new additional wind installations in Maui. We want to make sure that those can reach market. There's very large PV potential on the Big Island as well as Maui. There's, of course, that potential exists here as well. But making sure that all of these technologies can actually be brought to market and can be built into a larger grid, a bigger network of electrical grid, so that we have a stabler system.
All right. And as far as permitting goes, that's always an issue when you want to build something. So can you tell us about the e-permitting that's being developed or that has been developed? Is that an online system? And what about the wizard?
The online permitting wizard is something that we expect to be in place in its full operational form in April of 2012. We've been testing it for a number of months. Department of Health also has an online system that will be actually up and running about that time or before.
Good, I understand. In terms of the ratepayers, I understand that there's government funding, but it may not be enough. There may be some burden on the ratepayers as well. What do you expect in that area? What would you tell the ratepayers who are paying utility bills? How are there going to be any changes that they need to know about?
We already have the highest utility rates in the nation, and everyone suffers from those. The whole point of the Hawaii Energy Agenda, the Clean Energy Initiative, is to be able to move away from our stranglehold on imported oil.
Today we're at the offices of Sopogy, and Darren Kimura is Chief Executive Officer and President of the company. And he's here with us to tell us a little bit about what's happening with solar, his company, and also what his plans are for contributing to clean energy in Hawaii. So, Darren, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Good. Now, I was always been curious about your name, the company name, Sopagy. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came with that?
You know, when we created the company, we actually created the technology first. And what we ended up with is a concentrating solar panel that uses mirrors on a motor. So once we developed that, we wanted to be unique because the panel that we had created was very unique. And we also wanted it to mean something that, or have meaning. So we took the words solar power technology and we kind of jammed them together, and that's how we created Sopagy. So Sopagy is the SO from solar, PO from power, and the GY from technology, Sopagy.
All right, I got that. Now you've installed projects in Hawaii. You've also installed them internationally. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've done in these locations?
Sopagy is a manufacturer. We developed these panels. They're concentrating solar technology. And then effectively what we do is we harness the heat from the sun and we run that through many collectors and we get to a very high level of heat. So what we can do with that is we can use that heat to produce energy in many different ways. So around the world we have projects in places like Spain, Jordan, Egypt, Abu Dhabi, Papua New Guinea, Japan, Mexico, throughout the United States and Hawaii. And we do things that where we use our solar panels for power generation. We also use our solar panels for creating air conditioning and even things like desalinating water. So we make drinking water out of seawater with the panel.
Is that by using the panels to cook the water and get the salt out?
Yeah, pretty much.
Evaporation process, is that the idea?
That's exactly right. It's a distillation process, like you would do when you go camping. You know, you take water from the stream, you put it over the, the hot fire, and then, it begins to condensate and whatnot. That's what we do too. Of course, we do it in a very concentrated way, so we can actually, create cases, if you will, of bottled water from this technology.
The state is interested in creating a system and a grid supplied by a lot of different types of technologies. Where do you see that your technology fits in? How can you be a part of the whole here?
Yeah, the concept of the smart community is one where you have a lot of different types of energy generating devices on one grid with some kind of software that is running the grid, so actively managing what's happening. For example, when the windmill stops blowing, there's no energy, that needs to be supplemented by something else. So the software is going to be able to figure that part out and pull energy in from someplace else.
So the software basically interconnects everybody. It monitors who's contributing what to the grid, and it says basically, okay, you're down or you're reduced, I want more from you. Is that the idea?
That's
Is that
right,
how it works?
yes. So that's a part of it. So exactly right, it's actively sensing what's happening in the city, if you will, real time. So what's using energy and what is not. But a part of that requires you to have stable and firm energy. And the way we get stable and firm energy now is we burn oil. So we burn oil, X amount of oil all the time, and that's what we call our base load.
Mm-hmm.
And renewable energy doesn't typically dip into the base load because renewables are very volatile. The wind can stop blowing at any time, a cloud can block the sun, and you get no solar energy from photovoltaics.
Right.
What Sopagy's technology does is we actually have the capability to incorporate energy storage. And the way we do that, again, is because we generate heat with the solar panel. We take that heat and we store it into a large container, kind of like a big thermos. So the energy coming out of that thermos is going into our turbine at a consistent level. Doesn't matter if you've got sun or clouds, it's still coming out at a consistent level.
So you can kind of firm up the power even though the sun may not be as bright on a certain part of the day.
Exactly. We can run it at night, we can run it during cloudy periods, we can run it during the system peak, which is between 5 to 9 p.m. So one of the advantages of our technology as it relates to the smart community is that we now become part of the baseload solution. So by doing large projects with CSP, concentrating solar power, which is what we do, you can actually take offline generators that might be producing energy but using fossil fuels.
Well, in terms of having this type of storage, it requires land. These units requires acreage. Land in Hawaii is expensive. I'm sure if you go overseas, I think land is very inexpensive. What do you do to find land here? What do you do for permitting? Is it really difficult to set up, say, a solar farm on Oahu or the neighbor islands at this point?
At this point, not so difficult. You know, you're right. Land is a challenge in Hawaii. It's expensive. You know, we're an island, so there's not an abundance of the land, but we still have a lot of land. You know, lands that were once used for sugarcane, for example, that are now barren. Now weeds might be growing on those. Those could be converted into solar farming. So, and there's a lot of them. You know, we've got a lot of military lands. We've got a lot of lands that were once used for military type purposes, but no longer. Now they're being overgrown by keawe. You know, we have lands that were once used for landfills, for example, that, you know, you really can't build anything on top of, but they're still good lands. You could use those lands, that kind of gray land, if you will, and put solar panels on top of that. So today, there's still quite a bit of opportunity on Oahu, you know, several, maybe 100 megawatts worth of potential for the island of Oahu. And of course, that expands on neighbor islands as well.
Can you use rooftops? Does a rooftop of a big facility or a big warehouse, does that supply you with enough space to put solar panels and make it efficient?
Oh, absolutely. So what we do specifically is we use these mirrors again, and we create heat. So on the commercial rooftop, what we would do is use these solar panels, use the heat, and create air conditioning directly. So the way that you might be thinking about air conditioning today is you've got a building, you've got a device that you plug into the wall, and that creates air conditioning. So it uses electricity. That's a good process, but it's a relatively inefficient process. You know, that motor is getting hot, it uses refrigerants, which may not be so good for the environment. The thermal air conditioning solution that we have, we're able to use the solar panels, you know, activate a chemical, which is normally found in the ocean, so it's naturally occurring, and that creates the air conditioning you would need for your building.
What about to supply power to the grid? Can rooftops be leased, for example, to offset, say, the land price, so that companies can give enough space so that more power can go into the grid? Is that possible, or is a rooftop too small?
No, definitely possible today, and it's happening pretty big. So you'll find buildings all over the state now with PV panels on them. In many cases, those systems are designed to take that building off the grid, but in some cases, that system is designed to not only take that building off the grid, but also send electrons into the grid for, you know, excess power as well.
I know the flat panels are
Yes.
like that, but are yours also workable for that type of system?
Today, no. Today, Sopogy's technologies would be used on the rooftop for air conditioning, and if you wanted to do power, we like to do them big.
Okay, so you'd need land.
We would need land on the ground.
Okay, so in terms of the permitting, is there can you estimate 2 years, 3 years down the road for permitting? And I mean, let's just say that you decided, okay, well, we're going to put in the panels and we're going to supply power to the grid. How long would it take? What's your lead time on permitting and financing and things like that?
About 18 to 24 months.
So about 1.5 to 2 years.
Exactly.
And in terms of financing, is financing available for these kinds of projects?
Oh yes, financing is definitely available. The rate of return, which is what the financier is going to look for to make a go or no go decision, the rate of return is very good. So it's absolutely financeable. You know, the challenge...
Can you give me an idea of what the rate of return is?
Sure. Yeah, on a 20-year basis, a lot of investors are looking for something at about 8% to maybe low 20s. So just to give you an idea of the comparison, if you went to the bank today and you put in $100, you might get 2%. You could take that same $100 and put them into a solar project and get 8%, but possibly even up to 20%. So it's a very good bandwidth, much more attractive than conventional forms of financing. So that's totally available today, yes.
In terms of the international scope, can you give us a clue as to what else you've got coming up internationally?
Well, you know, Sopogy as a manufacturer, our goal is to sell our products all around the world. And we're very bullish right now on Asia. With the concerns that they have there over nuclear energy, and, you know,
especially now.
Yeah, especially now. They're shifting over to green energy solutions. And our technology, because we're heat, not light, works better in places like Asia where you might have more clouds. So as a result of that, you know, we're finding very good traction out that way. We're doing quite a bit in the Middle East right now as well. The interesting phenomenon there is that the government subsidizes the use of oil domestically. So the oil companies would prefer to sell the oil because that they get full rate recovery on, as opposed to using it domestically. So to offset that, they're using renewable energy, which I think is very ironic.
Well, they've got enough sun and heat over there, so the sun shines quite brightly. I would say it's similar to Hawaii.
Yes.
Probably a lot drier, though. At APEC, you signed a memorandum with a Chinese company. Can you tell us what's been happening with that? Has anything gone forward with that?
Yes, we've been working quite hard on trying to develop our relationship. So the intent was that this company based in China, which was part of the APEC constituency, would come to Hawaii, invest in Hawaii, build projects in Hawaii with us, and we would go to China and do the same thing. We would bring our technology to China, build power projects out there. So, we've been working on this quite hard, and it's continuing to develop. So hopefully soon we can see some of the fruits of that labor.
When I went out to the wind farm or the wind turbine facility in Kahuku, that facility puts out enough power for 7,700 homes. How much would you need in terms of acreage or space to put out 7,700 homes? Enough power for that?
It'd probably be about the same amount of acreage as a wind farm. So whatever the total area is that they would need, we're probably about the same amount of area. I don't know what that would be off the bat, but it'd be a lot. I mean, as you can imagine, these wind farms are, the windmills are spaced pretty far between themselves. So all renewables are pretty land intensive.
They're land intensive, so everybody's up against the same situation.
Yes. Yeah, of course, with windmills, you can put them in terrain areas where it might be more mountainous or rocky. For solar, we would prefer it to be on the leeward side where it's sunnier, but also
And does the land have to be flat as
a
well?
little flatter, yes. Yes.
Just a consistency with the solar rays coming down?
Yes. The flatter it is, the less losses you have in a field. So the more, elevation changes you have, the more areas for possible loss. So if you can make it flat, you'll have the most efficient field.
Okay, very good. Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think what's happening right now in Hawaii is very exciting. We see a lot of new projects coming online. We need it all. I mean, the goal set by the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative is very ambitious, but I think together with our technologies, working together to try and improve state policies, we can get there. So, this is a great time to be in clean energy.
Okay, I agree. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
We have a 30 megawatt project, and this includes 12 turbines made by Clipper Wind Power. Each are capable of producing 2.5 megawatts of wind energy per hour. The Kawailoa project we are about to construct will include 30 turbines manufactured by Siemens, another manufacturer. Those 30 turbines are rated at 2.3 megawatts. They'll be a little taller than the ones we have here in Kahuku, but in total, the capacity of this project, as Jacob mentioned, is about 7,700 homes being able to be powered by this project. Kawailoa will be able to power the equivalent of 14,500 Oahu homes.
Great to be here with you, Henry.
Great to be here, Jacob.
When I moved here about 30 years ago, I looked at the environment, I liked the culture, I was really enthralled with the islands, and I got really creative. I started writing. And I know that things have to progress, but the question is, how far do they progress, and how do they progress so that we can keep the same inspiration going? So in terms of Life of the Land, what do you do?
Well, Life of the Land has been around since February 1970. We were founded just before the first Earth Day. and we have worked on a wide range of environmental and social issues over the years. For example, we founded 8 of the neighborhood boards on Oahu. We work heavily through regulatory agencies and through public education campaigns, and on occasion when we have to, either the legislature or the courts.
So tell me about your involvement in renewable energy and clean energy. How did you get into that?
I got in 1996. Lifeland had been involved prior to then, but in 1996 there was the proposed Wahila Ridge transmission line by Hawaiian Electric to put a line basically up St. Louis Heights from roughly Iolani School area to the back of Palolo. And that had been an ongoing fight that had been going on since 1971. And 10,000 people turned out against the line. A number of organizations across the board, neighborhood boards from Kalihi to Hawaii Kai to Waikiki, and 3 community groups fought the battle, the contested case proceeding before the Board of Land Natural Resources.
Okay. Well, tell me then, what about renewable energy and clean energy today? How are you involved with that?
I don't like the term clean energy because it is not defined, and therefore it can be anything that you want it to be or anything that somebody else wants to be. I don't like the term renewable energy either because renewable energy has been defined by the fossil fuel industry, and like clean coal, the definitions leave a lot to be desired. So what I like are low climate impact, low environmental impact, low greenhouse gas emission, culturally friendly indigenous energy sources.
I see. Well, which projects have you been tracking, and what are your thoughts on the environment related to them?
We cover all proposals on energy generation, from the geothermal expansion on the Big Island, where there is a lot less public resistance to geothermal now. When it was first put in, they violated cultural issues and environmental issues, but the new geothermal has cleaned up their act. We like some of the wind systems when they're accepted by the community. We like solar, especially rooftop solar. We like ocean thermal energy conversion, some wave energy systems. The ones that are the most suspect are biofuels. If you use waste oil like Pacific Biodiesel is doing, that's fine. But when you start growing your own crops and making biofuels, then often a lot of the side effects are sort of minimalized or counted as zero, and therefore you really have to examine each case very technically, very individually.
Well, then which of these projects would you be supportive of that would allow energy needs to move forward while keeping our quality of life?
One, I think it's a shame that every commercial roof on this island doesn't have massive solar on it.
You mean like commercial buildings?
Yeah, like Home Depot in Iwalei, just built, flat roof, sunny area, no panels on it. Lowe's, right next door, sunny roof, no panels on it. Huge parking lot right next to it with the sun beating down on cars. You could put shelter on top with solar panels.
So
on
you see
top.
potential there.
There's a lot of potential. There's an ocean thermal energy conversion project that's about to go in on Nelha facility on the Big Island, which is great. There is some micro wind being tested from some at Saunders Hall at UH, some at Hickam Air Force Base. There's a wave energy project going in off Maui, off the north shore of Maui. There are a lot of great renewable energy options coming forward.
Very good, very good.
And also Sophagy and their concentrated solar power is a really great idea of being able to use sunlight after the sun is set.
In terms of renewables, or let's just say the type of energy that you like, we call them renewables. I've done articles on renewables, so I'm used to that.
I'm used to that term too.
So in terms of the ones that are most feasible to provide enough energy that firms up cloudy days, when the clouds pass, you're running into these issues, right? You don't have as much energy creation. Which are the ones that are best, do you think, for the islands?
I think it's really a portfolio. The firm energy ones are geothermal and ocean thermal energy conversion. You could put in geothermal on the Big Island, you could put in OTEC on this island. They both provide firm renewable power. Wave energy is the next most firm of them. Wind and battery and solar work, but you have to use batteries and other things to help stabilize the grid, but they can be part of the mix.
I see. And in terms of the underwater cable, I know that project has been going through transition. Right now, from what I understand, it may go from Maui to Oahu instead of from the other neighbor islands to Maui to Oahu. Is that correct?
Yes. One of the problems with that was in 1991, the Public Utilities Commission set up something called Integrated Resource Planning, where all the energy stakeholders could come together, look at a utility plan, advise them, and then the plan would go to the PUC, and it would guide energy policy. The Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative did away with the planning dockets. So instead of going from a community basis, we went to what the utility says is the one and only future.
Well, the utility is the one that's going to be putting the pieces of the puzzle together. Wouldn't they have to have some kind of say or some kind of decision making?
Well, the problem is the utility has their own generators and they get energy from other people's generators. And therefore there's an incentive either A, not to actually buy someone else's energy, or B, to buy energy that is highly intermittent, that you have to have your own generators as sort of a backup. So there's a conflict of interest. And just as energy efficiency programs were taken away from the utility and given to an independent entity called Hawaii Energy, which now handles all energy efficiency, because for a company on the one hand to sell you energy and make profit from it, on the other hand to sell you a device that lowers their profit is inherently a conflict of interest.
Okay.
So the same way exists between other people's energy and their own. So we need to encourage the company through decoupling mechanisms or imputed debt mechanisms to be able to earn a reasonable return themselves, but to have them get out of the generation business and to have...
For Hawaiian Electric.
Yeah.
Well, from what I understand, that's what they're going to be doing. They're going to be more of a distributor instead of a generator over time. But we'll see how that takes shape. Anything else you'd like to comment on regarding the energy process here?
The energy process is a very, very complex process. It goes through the Public Utilities Commission. Most people in the state, I think, don't have any idea what that entity is. It was founded in 1913 as a way because Hawaii Gas wanted to compete against Hawaiian Electric. And Hawaiian Electric said, in exchange for making us the monopoly, you can regulate us and control our prices. So it's a body that seeks to protect rates and keep rates low, but at the same time, it's so technical and so difficult to understand, most people stay away from it. So it becomes very insular.
I see. Okay, Henry, thanks very much for your time. We're here today with Paul Brubaker on the windward side, and we decided to talk to an economist about renewable energy, about clean energy, get a little bit of background information on how an economist thinks in terms of the money spent on these projects. So, how are you doing, Paul?
Good, great. Thanks for inviting me to have a conversation with you.
My pleasure. First of all, I wanted to find out a little bit about your background. Have you been doing any kind of work in the energy industry?
I've actually had a paid consultancy with the Western States Petroleum Association. I've done a little bit of pro bono work, I guess you'd say, for a lot of the advocacy groups in conservation and natural resources.
Okay, good. Now, in terms of renewable energy, clean energy, have you been following and tracking with what's going on in the state?
Oh, more lately than over the years, but I was around, for 1980, so I remember the last flirtation with alternate energy.
Was that the geothermal?
Well, there were a lot of things going on, if you recall. Geothermal, of course, came on. Ocean thermal energy.
Oh,
was
ocean
big.
thermal
a lot
energy
of wind
conversion.
wind
Yeah.
energy in those days.
Uh-huh.
And my dad actually did a lot of work in biomass energy. In fact, there used to be a tree right behind where you're sitting that he developed partly. From an economic standpoint, what I would say is that we need, again, an architecture is like the way I like to put it, where what happens may may not necessarily be presupposed, but almost certainly is going to involve some portfolio of renewables. I have my personal favorites, so I mean, I live on the windward side for a reason, and 6 tunnels and 12 lanes is only part of that. But the point is, it's partly about infrastructure, but it's also partly about it's cooler and there's wind, and so I think a lot about that. Now, I'm told that a lot of people just don't like big wind turbines in their backyard, and that's interesting to me because it illustrates, one of the many trade-offs that we face here.
Right.
I mean, we can go for technology, but then it has an aesthetic outcome that communities may not be happy with. If you've grown up in Hawaii surfing and spending a lot of time in the water, the ocean around here will give you a pretty serious beat down most of the time.
Beat down?
Beat down.
Meaning?
Meaning you are going to get trashed if you stick anything out in the ocean for any significant period of time. Pretty quickly. I mean, that's my guess. So that's
the currents, the waves.
The waves, the wind, what's in the atmosphere,
the
right?
salt,
it's corrosive.
Probably, yeah.
I mean,
sure.
the stuff just corrodes
So
from
then you
within.
probably, on something like that, would have to consider maintenance costs and...
Absolutely. But again, I'm happy to accept the idea that a private investor chancing it will find out whether it is or isn't commercially viable. I don't feel like we have to dedicate public resources to assisting them in that quest. Beyond, as I say, a kind of a basic R&D environment.
So you believe that it's fine for the state to do the R&D, but when it comes to actual construction and development, it should be turned over to investors?
Yeah, I draw the line well back from where I think a lot of people otherwise would, and not just in energy, by the way. We subsidize a lot of stuff, a lot of economic activity that is appealing in some sense or another, but as I say, is not clear why it should be favored over plate lunches, to put it in the terms I did
plate lunches
earlier.
are fine.
Man, I love plate lunches. Let's subsidize that
Okay,
stuff.
so overall, in terms of the energy that we've been talking about, do you give it a thumbs up or anything?
I give a big thumbs up to 2 thumbs up to the prospects. It's an exciting period for the development of new technologies in the energy area. It's going to be really interesting to see if electricity can be produced in small-ish footprints at low cost. And there's equally interesting things happening in what relative to what we're talking about would be microtechnology like motor vehicles. Obviously, a huge, and that's a good example, a big battle between conventional internal combustion engines versus hybrids versus electric cars. Not sure how that's going to turn out. The problem with the electric car is they have to pay for the electricity to put, and that ain't getting any cheaper.
Right.
But I think thumbs up in terms of the excitement about the possibilities and the rewards, I think, for people that put their minds to it. Thumbs down on the early stages of our policy with regard to these alternatives. My sense is that we're framing the question the wrong way. For example, energy security, really? Is that the most important issue? As opposed to efficiency, let's say. And in that conversation,
in other words,
for example,
which one is going to be weighed more?
Absolutely.
Energy efficiency or energy security?
That's right. Should we tolerate inefficiency in the name of energy security, whatever that is? And my answer is no. I mean, there's a lot of people that are like, oh, 9/11. And I'm like, oh, get over it. But that's kind of there are a lot of people that are actually worried that the ships won't get to Hawaii.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm like, because the U.S. Navy at Pearl Harbor can't really? I don't stay awake nights thinking about that. I try to think in the 2 centuries since Captain Cook came, when the ships couldn't make it to Hawaii. There was about 6 months where we ran out of toilet paper, I remember, in 1971.
Oh, I heard about that one.
But that was a strike on the West Coast. And I'm pretty sure the ships kept coming during World War II. So World War didn't do it. What scenario is the one I'm supposed to be worried about? So yeah, I'm a huge efficiency fan. I think that we should strive to making it better, faster, and cheaper all the time. And that to me, for example, is one of those really deep kinds of social choice questions that in grappling with in the last decade. I mean, the last decade has been framed by the 9/11 event and the legacy of global terrorism in many, many dimensions. My personal opinion, somebody who actually studied history for a while in college, is that we'll look back on this last decade the way we look back at the McCarthy era in the late 1940s and early 1950s.
Interesting.
As a period of understandable paranoia that once we got over was good to lay to rest.
Well, let's just hope there's enough creativity so that we can move forward and do the right thing.
Creativity and opportunity for people to chance it. It's all about making sure that if you have the idea, you have an opportunity to make it happen.
Hello, we're here today with Robbie Alm, Executive Vice President of Hawaiian Electric. Robbie, how you doing?
Great to be here.
Good.
Good.
We're going to go over a few issues that Hawaiian Electric is dealing with. It's going to be going through a major transformation in the next, decade or so. We're going to find out a little bit about it. If you fly over Honolulu, if you fly over the islands, you'll see photovoltaics on rooftops. Practically every week there's a story or two about new types of renewable energy and progress with wind, biomass, biofuel, ocean.
You name it, we've got all of it here. We're very lucky. Hawaii's blessed.
Yeah, there's a great potential.
Huge.
In order to assimilate everything, we'd like to find out what Hawaiian Electric is going to have to go through to be able to handle all of these power sources and these different power sources in order to supply the energy needs of the state and of the island. Can you tell us what Hawaiian Electric will be going through? Will it need restructuring? Will it need new departments?
Essentially what we're going through, particularly here in Hawaii, is we're going from a place where there were a few large power plants, ours and others, that we collected energy from and then distributed throughout the system. The future will hold a lot more distributed generation, rooftop photovoltaics, or much smaller power plants or power generators spread out across the system. So it'll be our responsibility to collect all of that. There'll still be some big power plants. They may be wind plants as opposed to fossil fuel plants, or there may be biofuel plants instead of the current fossil fuel plants, but collect all of that energy together and then distribute it out across the system. So in some ways it'll be a far more sophisticated task than the one there is today. I think people have thought, well, we'll leave the generation business. That's probably not true, at least in the foreseeable future, because the heaviest sources of wind in Hawaii, of energy in Hawaii, are wind and solar. And those are fluctuating resources that need to be backed up. And at this point, we will probably be a significant part of that backup. As we find resources like geothermal, biomass, biofuels, and many of the forms of ocean energy, those are firm. Those behave very much like a conventional power plant. And as those come online, then there'll be less and less need for some of the current sources of backup power. As far as changes to the company, I think the major change is one we already made, which is we took the control room, the system operations area, and we took it out and made it a separate department, a separate area of the company. Because the future, as I said, is to have that area take in power from a much wider variety than the traditional and distribute it out. So it really becomes an important standalone function.
Well, what about the users of power? What are they going to expect, or is there something they need to plan for? Do they need any kind of backup systems, or will it be just a seamless transition?
I think it'll be relatively seamless. I mean, more and more people are putting power on their property, photovoltaics being the big example, though there is some increase in distributed wind, very small wind power kinds of equipment that can be on an individual home or business. And it may be, as technology evolves, and you're right, we expect it to keep evolving quickly, it may be there are other small kinds of power plants you could have on your roof. So if you produce power on site, you know, you can either put a battery there and give yourself storage of it, or use as much as you can and rely on the larger system to be your storage, if you will. But other than that, the average customer who doesn't put a small power plant on their own should really not see a difference. I mean, that's our goal, is that it would be seamless. It would just go from oil to all the kinds of local renewable energy we have.
I see. So then in that case, a large building, for example, would they benefit from having their own storage unit as opposed to, say, a single-family home that may not use as much power? Would that be something that they could get into?
I mean, not to avoid the question, but it's actually a math question. You know, storage right now is relatively expensive. So if you add that into the equation for a lot of businesses, it doesn't make sense. It's cheaper to essentially have the system be your storage. But some want it anyway for their own reasons. And we would expect prices of everything to come down over time, including the prices of on-site storage. So there's probably a point at which it would make sense. But right now it's your choice. You kind of do the math and decide for your business, is it the right thing to have on-site storage? For some it probably is. For others, it's probably better to rely on the system overall to provide your backup.
I see. In terms of the system then, all of these different sources that generate power, do they give the same type of power to Hawaiian Electric? In other words, do they produce the same kind of electricity that goes to the grid, or will there have to be some kind of modifications to handle any fluctuations or any variation in what Hawaiian Electric has to provide the ratepayers?
In one sense, it's all the same. An electron's an electron.
Right.
And so when it comes from the power generator, a wind farm or a power plant, and gets into the system, it's all the same. You know, and those electrons move around the system and provide power. And, you know, frankly, we can't tell what's a black electron and what's a green electron once it's in the system. The biggest difference is probably, you know, the degree to which we can count on a steady flow. So from a conventional power plant or from sources like biomass or geothermal, which perform like the traditional kinds of units, it's a very steady flow of power. And we're unlikely to see significant fluctuations in it. With wind and sun, you know, wind doesn't blow, wind blows, you know, inconsistently. Sun, you know, obviously not on at night, and even during the day we have clouds, or, you know, last couple of days we had lots of rain. Then those units simply don't produce the same amount of electrons, or the amount they do fluctuates. We have to back that up, or they have to back it up on site. But once it's in the system, it's all the same, and we just move it around from wherever the producers of it are into everybody's homes and businesses.
All right. And in terms of the rates, what can businesses expect of the rates? Small businesses, for example, they need to know what they're up against in terms of costs and future costs so that they can plan accordingly. Larger businesses, maybe they could handle it, but even then, a businessman has to know future costs to survive.
And really, that's been, among all the other problems with oil, one of the biggest problems with oil, is its prices fluctuate based on events around the world over which we have no control. So you could have been planning at the beginning of 2011 for your utility bill based on what happened in 2010. And then the prices just skyrocketed during 2000. Nobody could plan for that. I mean, if you had had a budget, it would not have been in your wildest imagination that oil would increase the level it increased during the year. The great thing about local renewable energy is it's all either free, the source of the power, wind, sun, ocean, those are free. So what you're paying for is the cost of the piece of equipment that takes the energy out of the air or out of the sky and converts it to electricity. That's a capital cost. That you can predict. It's a fairly steady cost. Or the other energy like geothermal or biomass waste to energy has a fixed cost, a royalty or whatever. And again, you combine that with the capital cost of getting the power to you, it will be predictable. So we think it'll be cheaper. A lot of it already is cheaper. But on top of which, as we switch to local renewable energy, then you will be able to predict your prices. So I think the question is, the faster we get away from oil, the more predictable and we believe cheaper we can make your bill.
Well, that's I'm sure that's good news to a lot of people. In terms of labor, would you need a different kind of labor force? Would you need more workers? Or could you do it with the labor force that you have already?
Oh no, I think there's job creation coming.
Any possibility percentage growth in terms of the labor force?
Hard to know, but they say, for example, that currently of the construction work in Hawaii today, 15% of it is based on solar. So, I mean, this is big stuff. I mean, if 15% of our construction business is solar energy, then there's lots of jobs with this out there. I think if, it'll take people to run a plant. If we end up with biofuels, it'll be mechanized farming, so it's not stoop labor, but there will be labor involved in that. The more distributed generation you have, solar, wind, or other kinds of renewable energy, there's a whole group of people that have to install and then maintain those pieces of equipment. I mean, it isn't just something you put on a roof and walk away from. We want those units to last 20, 30 years, so they need to be maintained. They would require
maintenance.
Exactly. So, as opposed to, a few big units, the more we distribute out, the more opportunities there are for job and for job growth. Some of it will take training, and I think there's some of that underway right now at the community colleges and others. The solar industry has just grown by leaps and bounds over the past few years, and they've been hiring people right and left. And I think most of the companies train their own folks, but I think there are training programs now being offered through community colleges. Some of what's coming is likely to be fairly sophisticated in the operation of plants. The folks who will run the geothermal plants of the future and the biomass plants of the future, that's a sophisticated piece of business. And, I would hope that we would be able to train our own folks, Hawaii folks, to take those jobs. But that's got to be one of the things we look at in the coming years is, are we getting training ready so it's our people who fulfill the renewable or fill the renewable energy jobs, not us importing people to run those kind of plants.
Right.
I mean, we may need expertise to start them, to get them going, but once they're going, we should be able to do that work.
What about the reliance of neighbor island sources to power the guzzling Oahu, which requires a lot of power?
Oahu is the industrial center for the state, so it has big harbors, the refineries, the industrial center of Hawaii, and the largest tourist center, Waikiki, which funds a lot of the state, are all on this island. And, it's kind of, you choose whether you live in this urban center, which Oahu really is, or whether you choose the more rural lifestyle of a neighbor island. I think the reality is the neighbor islands have sources of energy. Oahu doesn't. Geothermal basically exists on younger islands where there's still live or relatively recent dormant volcanoes. I mean, that's where we're going to get the geothermal from. So by definition, Kauai and Oahu are kind of out of it. And it's Maui maybe and Big Island. And so a lot depends on how you look at it, how you frame it. I think currently the leadership on Maui and the Big Island are kind of looking at themselves and saying, we could export energy. I mean, we can build up employment sources on our island to create renewable power that we would then essentially sell to Oahu. The big thing that Oahu brings to that equation is a large rate base. So if you live on a neighbor island, you are paying very high rates for electricity.
Right.
Part of that is there are very few people on the island to support the system. So the Big Island is huge. I mean, literally, it is a big island. You fit all the other islands on it. It has a relatively small population. They pay a lot to support a huge infrastructure of wires running around that island with very few people to pay for it, which is why the rates are so high. If we linked our islands together with a cable and went to one statewide rate structure,
You think it would even out?
their rates would drop dramatically, along with the economic development on their island of selling power. You know, that's how the two current mayors see it, Arakawa and Kenoi. There are people who say, well, why should we help Oahu?
Mhm.
They use too much power and we don't. You know, it's sort of it's the old, how do you view it? You know, do you view this as a negative because we're being asked to create power that Oahu would use? Or do you look at that and say, one, it's a huge opportunity for economic development on the neighbor islands, which doesn't necessarily involve that many people, so we're not talking about shifting the population from Oahu to the neighbor islands. And secondly, at that point, Oahu would owe the neighbor islands their rate, the power of their rate base to lower their costs. So I personally think it's a positive exchange. I know there are people who see it differently, but it would also allow us as a state, us as a place, to largely get off oil. And that, for the future of these islands, for our kids, would, to me, be one of the greatest things we could ever do, is detach from this dependence on overseas oil, which there's no good, I mean, there's nothing right about that. You know, it pollutes, it comes from dangerous places, it fuels wars right now that our kids end up going and fighting. I mean, I don't see anything positive about it, that we should want to stay on that as opposed to go to renewable.
Okay, very good. Anything else you'd like to say about this?
One of the things that I think it's important to understand about Hawaiian Electric is we really don't make any money by virtue of being on oil. I mean, whatever the oil costs are, we simply pass them through to our customers. We don't make any money or profit off of that. So for us, switching to renewable energy doesn't come at a price tag in terms of our bottom line. It's the same for us. What's different for us is just as you were saying earlier, it gives us an opportunity to control our own destiny, to have sources and prices that we can rely on.
The local population
right,
to support their own destiny?
Right. Yeah, that at that point we know where our power is coming from. It's coming from our islands. We know what it's going to cost because this stuff, again, is either fixed or free cost energy, and then, you know, the capital cost is like a whole mortgage. I mean, you pay it off over time, but you know what your payments are. So it frees us of all of that. For a company that's operating to bring you energy to your home, being able to know where it's coming from, what its price is going to be, and be able to understand its availability going out over the coming years would be much, much better than this world we live in today, where I can't tell you tomorrow when we go into the market to buy oil what that oil is going to cost, or even if it's going to be available, or if there's going to be a problem with the tanker that brings that from the Middle East to Hawaii. I mean, all of those are issues and risks of the business we have now that if we could switch to local renewable energy, we'd be in great shape. As you pointed out at the very beginning, no matter what, our role will be to move this around. You know, if we could be relieved of that overseas fuel oil price risk and instead be moving around local energy, then we could concentrate on what we actually enjoy the most and do the best with, which is how do we take all these different sources but deliver you a steady state of electricity.
That's a nice thought. And in terms of how much time it will take, can you predict the time?
Actually, we've got 1,000 megawatts worth of renewable projects at some level of either negotiation or implementation.
This is
right
new
now.
sources?
Right. You know, that's a lot. You know, now, you know, it's 1,600 megawatts statewide, and the 1,000, you know, doesn't give us 1,000 worth of power, so we need a lot more than that. But that's a big number. I mean, Hawaii is really moving faster on this scale than probably any place in the world, certainly any place in the United States. And, you know, that's great. I mean, I think this has a real opportunity in Hawaii to reach numbers up to, and depending on geothermal, 100% for electricity. certainly the Big Island and Maui have a real opportunity to be off of oil within a decade.
Wow.
That's a dream worth chasing.
Okay, very good. Well, that's also economic security.
Absolutely.
Okay. Robbie, thanks very
Sure.
much for your time
My
today.
pleasure.